I knew something was off the moment I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday afternoon and saw wood splinters scattered across my backyard like confetti at a parade nobody wanted to attend. My name is Frank Anderson, and I had lived in the Pleasant Grove subdivision of Scottsdale, Arizona, for exactly 3 years without any major incidents, which in retrospect should have been my first warning sign that things were going too well. The storage fence I had installed 6 months earlier along the back property line was now sporting a gaping hole roughly 4 feet wide, the pressure-treated boards sawed clean through in a straight vertical line. I sat in my truck for a solid minute, hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I was looking at. Someone had deliberately cut through my fence, not knocked it down in a storm, not accidentally damaged it. Cut through it with what appeared to be a chainsaw based on the jagged edges and wood chips everywhere. I got out and walked closer, my work boots crunching on the debris. The fence had cost me $2,000 to install, and I had pulled every permit, followed every guideline, and measured everything twice to make sure it complied with the HOA regulations. The Pleasant Grove Homeowners Association was notorious for being strict, but I had done everything by the book. This fence sat exactly on my property line, was the approved height of 6 feet, and was painted the pre-approved shade of cedar that matched half the other fences in the neighborhood. Through the new opening, I could see directly into the yard of my neighbor behind me, a woman named Patricia Donnelly, who served as the vice president of our HOA board. She was standing on her back patio with her arms crossed, watching me with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for me to discover her handiwork. I walked through my gate and around to her front door, keeping my temper in check. 3 deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. My wife Sarah had taught me that technique before she passed away 2 years ago from cancer. She always said that staying calm was the best weapon against unreasonable people. Patricia answered on the second knock, already talking before I could get a word out. "I suppose you are here about the fence." "You cut through my fence," I said, keeping my voice level. "That's destruction of property." "That fence was blocking my view of the mountains," she replied, not a trace of apology in her tone. "I have lived here for 12 years, and I have always had a clear view of the McDowell Mountains from my patio. Your fence obstructed that view, and according to HOA Section 7.3, no structure can impede the scenic views of existing residents." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had taken during the fence installation. I got written approval from the architectural committee. I have the emails. I followed every single rule. "The architectural committee made an error," Patricia said, straightening her spine. "As vice president, I am correcting that error. The fence needs to be moved 3 feet forward onto your property, or you can install a fence that is only 4 feet tall. Those are your options." "Those are not options. That fence is on my property line, approved and permitted." You cannot just cut through someone's fence because you changed your mind about the rules. The HOA has the authority to enforce community standards, she said, her voice taking on that particular pitch that I would come to know very well over the following weeks. "If you do not comply, there will be fines, significant fines." I looked at this woman, probably in her mid-50s, with her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and her tennis outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and realized I was dealing with someone who had never been told no in a very long time. "I will be filing a police report for destruction of property," I said, "and I will be taking this to the HOA board meeting." "I am the HOA board," Patricia said. "Well, effectively, President Chambers rubber stamps everything I recommend. You will lose, Mr. Anderson." I always win these disputes." She closed the door in my face. I stood there for another moment, then walked back to my house and called the Scottsdale police non-emergency number. An officer arrived about 40 minutes later, a young guy named Officer Martinez who looked fresh out of the academy. He took photos, wrote down my statement, and went to talk to Patricia. He came back 15 minutes later, shaking his head. She admits to cutting the fence, says it was an HOA enforcement action. This is going to be tricky because it falls into a civil dispute area with the HOA involvement. You can file charges, but the city attorney might kick it back and tell you to handle it in civil court. So she can just destroy my property and face no consequences. I didn't say that. I am writing up the report. You will have documentation. That will help if you take her to small claims court. But between you and me, HOA disputes in this city get messy. You might want to lawyer up. After he left, I walked around my property and looked at the fence from different angles. That's when I remembered the trail camera. 3 months earlier, I had mounted a wildlife trail camera on a tree in my backyard because I kept finding my trash cans knocked over in the mornings. I wanted to see if it was javelinas or coyotes. The camera faced the back corner of my yard, right where my property met Patricia's. I retrieved the camera and brought it inside, my hands actually shaking a little as I popped out the SD card and plugged it into my laptop. The camera was motion activated and time stamped. If it had been facing the right direction, it should have captured whatever happened to my fence. The footage loaded and I started scrubbing through the files from that morning. There was a rabbit at 6:30 a.m., a stray cat at 7:15. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Then at 9:42 a.m., Patricia Donnelly walked into frame wearing safety glasses and carrying a chainsaw. I watched the entire thing play out in silent, time-stamped glory. She spent a good minute examining the fence, appearing to measure something with her hands. Then she started up the chainsaw, and over the course of about 3 minutes, she cut 2 vertical lines through 6 fence boards, kicked the section a few times until it fell forward into my yard, and then stood back to admire her work. She even gave a little satisfied nod before turning around and walking back to her house. I had her dead to rights. I made 3 copies of the video file and stored them in different locations, including uploading one to cloud storage. Then, I did what any reasonable person in 2025 would do. I started researching property law attorneys in Scottsdale. The next morning, I received a formal letter from the Pleasant Grove Homeowners Association. It was signed by Patricia Donnelly in her capacity as vice president, and cited me for having a non-compliant fence that obstructed views, and gave me 30 days to correct the violation or face fines of $200 per day. I made an appointment with an attorney named Robert Fitzgerald, whose office was in Old Town Scottsdale. He had good reviews online and specialized in property disputes and HOA conflicts. His consultation fee was $200, which seemed steep until he told me that HOA cases in Arizona were his primary practice, and he had dealt with Pleasant Grove specifically before. "Let me guess," he said after I explained the situation. "Patricia Donnelly, you know her." I have represented 3 different homeowners in disputes with her over the past 4 years. She is a piece of work. The woman treats the HOA like her personal fiefdom. He leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. The good news is that Arizona law is actually pretty favorable to homeowners in these situations. The bad news is that fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. "What kind of documentation do you have?" I showed him everything. The approval emails from the architectural committee, the permits from the city, the photos of the fence installation, the police report from Officer Martinez, And finally, the trail camera footage. Robert actually laughed when he saw Patricia cutting through the fence. This is gold. Absolute gold. She is on camera committing criminal mischief and trespassing, and she admits it is HOA enforcement. This is exactly the kind of overreach that judges hate. So what do? First, we respond to their violation letter with a cease and desist. Then we file a small claims case for the cost of the fence repair plus damages. We also file a separate complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA violations. And if you want to get really aggressive, we can push the police to file criminal charges for criminal damage to property. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. This kind of case usually runs between $8,000 and $15,000 total depending on how far it goes. But here is the thing. If we win, which I am confident we will given this video evidence, the judge can order the HOA to pay your attorney fees under Arizona Revised Statute 33-1807. The law specifically allows for fee recovery in HOA disputes where the association is acting in bad faith or beyond its authority. I thought about my savings account, about the fence that needed immediate repair, about the principle of the thing. Let's do it. We spent the next hour drafting response letters and filling out paperwork. Robert explained that he would file the small claims case first since it was faster and cheaper, then escalate if Patricia or the HOA retaliated. He also recommended I get the fence repaired immediately and keep all receipts. I got 3 quotes for the repair work. The lowest was $800. I hired the contractor and had him fix it within a week. I also installed 2 more trail cameras, positioning them to cover every angle of my backyard and the fence line. If Patricia tried anything else, I would have it documented. The small claims court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I received 2 more letters from the HOA. The first informed me that my fence was still non-compliant and fines would begin accruing. The second was a lien notice, claiming that I owed the HOA $4,000 in back fines for various alleged violations including the fence, a small oil stain on my driveway, and flowers in my front yard that were supposedly not on the approved plant list. Robert filed an emergency motion to stop the liens and fines, arguing they were retaliatory and without basis. The judge granted a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any action against me until the small claims case was resolved. That's when things got weird. I started noticing Patricia driving past my house multiple times a day. She would slow down, stare at my property, and sometimes take photos. I documented everything. Then my mailbox was knocked over one night. Then my trash cans went missing. Then someone reported to the city that I was running an illegal business from my home, which triggered an inspection. I am a software engineer who works remotely, which is completely legal, and the city inspector apologized for wasting both our time. Every single incident felt like Patricia's handiwork, but I could not prove it. The trail cameras never caught her doing anything else. Robert advised me to keep documenting everything and stay patient. The first HOA board meeting after the fence incident was mandatory attendance for all homeowners for the annual budget approval. I showed up with a notebook and my phone recording audio. Patricia sat at the head table with 3 other board members, including President Chambers, a retired accountant who looked like he wished he was anywhere else. When the floor opened for homeowner comments, I stood up. I want to address the fence issue with my property, I said. Vice President Donnelly cut through my fence without permission, causing $800 in damage. I have video evidence. I am currently pursuing legal action, but I wanted the other board members and homeowners to be aware of what is happening." The room went quiet. There were maybe 30 people in attendance, and every eye turned to Patricia. "Mr. Anderson's fence was non-compliant," Patricia said smoothly. "The HOA has the authority to remove non-compliant structures per the CC and Articles. This was an enforcement action, nothing more. The fence was approved by your own architectural committee," I countered. "I have the emails, and regardless of compliance, you do not have the right to destroy someone's property without notice or due process. The CC and Articles clearly state that the HOA can take immediate action when violations impact other residents," Patricia said. "Your fence blocked my view, which impacts my property value. I was within my rights." Another homeowner, an older man I did not know, raised his hand. "I actually looked into this after I heard what happened. The CC and Articles require written notice and a 30-day cure period before any enforcement action. Did you give Mr. Anderson notice?" Patricia's face flushed slightly. The severity of the violation warranted immediate action. "That's not what the governing documents say," the man persisted. "I am reading from Section 12.4 right here. It is pretty clear. Notice must be provided except in cases of immediate health or safety concerns. How is a fence a health or safety concern?" President Chambers cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this discussion and review the fence situation in executive session." "There's nothing to review," I said. "Miss Donnelly committed vandalism against my property. That is a criminal matter, not an HOA matter. I am just making sure everyone knows what kind of leadership we have." The meeting continued, but I could feel the tide shifting. Other homeowners started asking questions about HOA enforcement procedures. Someone mentioned that they had received a violation notice without photos or specific details. Another person complained about unclear fines. Patricia's face got redder and redder as the meeting went on. After it ended, 3 different neighbors approached me in the parking lot. They all had similar stories of Patricia overstepping her authority, issuing questionable fines, or making threats about violations that were not actually in the CC and Articles. One woman named Carol Hudson told me that Patricia had fined her $3,000 for painting her front door a color that was not approved, even though Carol had matched the exact paint code from the approved color palette. "She is a bully," Carol said. "But nobody wants to fight her because it is too expensive. Most people just pay the fines and move on." "I am not paying anything," I said. "And I am not moving on. This is my home." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching HOA law and talking to other homeowners. It turned out that Patricia had been systematically abusing her position for years. She had personal vendettas, selective enforcement, and a pattern of targeting people she did not like while ignoring violations by her friends. But nobody had ever successfully challenged her because she was well connected in the community and had enough retirement money to throw at lawyers. The small claims court date finally arrived. Small claims court in Arizona has a limit of $3,500, so I was suing for the $800 fence repair, $2,000 for the original fence cost, since Patricia claimed it needed to be moved, and $700 in miscellaneous expenses, including attorney consultation fees and my time off work. Robert came with me for moral support, though he could not officially represent me in small claims court. The proceedings were held at the Scottsdale Justice Court on 4th Street. Patricia showed up with her own attorney, which was unusual for small claims but not prohibited. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Morrison. She listened to Patricia's attorney argue that this was an HOA matter and should be dismissed, then asked me for my evidence. I presented everything methodically: the approval emails, the permits, the police report, photos of the damage, repair receipts, and finally I asked if we could play the video evidence. Judge Morrison allowed it. The courtroom had a large monitor and I plugged in my laptop. The footage played in complete silence. Patricia cutting through the fence was even more damning when shown on a big screen in a courtroom. You could see the deliberation in her actions, the satisfaction when the boards fell away. "Miss Donnelly," Judge Morrison said when the video ended, "is that you in the footage?" Patricia's attorney whispered something to her. She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, but as I explained, this was HOA enforcement. Did you provide Mr. Anderson with written notice before you cut through his fence? The violation was immediate and severe." "That is not what I asked." "Did you provide written notice?" "No, but the CC and Articus allow for immediate action." When Judge Morrison held up her hand. "I have reviewed the CC and Articus for Pleasant Grove. They were submitted as evidence." Section 12.4 requires written notice and a 30-day cure period for all violations, except those posing immediate health or safety risks. Is that correct? Yes, but was this fence a health or safety risk? Patricia hesitated. It was obstructing views, which impacts property values and quality of life. That is not a health or safety risk. So you violated your own HOA procedures in addition to destroying Mr. Anderson's property. "Do I have that right?" the attorney whispered to Patricia again. She looked like she wanted to argue but finally said, "I suppose that is one interpretation." Judge Morrison was not amused. "It is not an interpretation, Miss Donnelly. It is what happened. You unilaterally decided to destroy your neighbor's property without following proper procedures, and you did so in your capacity as an HOA officer. That is textbook abuse of authority." She ruled in my favor for the full $3,500, which covered all my claimed damages. But then she did something I was not expecting. She added a personal statement to the record. "Miss Donnelly, I am going to be frank with you. I see a lot of HOA cases in this courtroom, and I see a lot of abuse of power. What you did here was not just a violation of Mr. Anderson's property rights. It was vindictive, it was illegal, and it sets a terrible precedent for community governance. If you cannot follow the rules you are supposed to enforce, you have no business being on an HOA board. I am going to recommend that this judgment and the video evidence be forwarded to the Arizona Department of Real Estate for review of your conduct." Patricia's face went pale. Her attorney started to object, but Judge Morrison was done with the case. The gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, Robert was grinning. "That was better than I could have hoped." Judge Morrison basically called her out as a corrupt HOA officer on the record. That is going to follow her. What happens now? She has to pay you the judgment within 30 days. If she does not, we can start garnishment proceedings, and the ADRE review could result in sanctions against the HOA or even removal of board members if they find a pattern of abuse. You should file a formal complaint with them and include the video. I filed the complaint that afternoon. I also did something else. I posted the trail camera footage to YouTube with a simple title: HOA Vice President Cuts Through Neighbor's Fence. I did not expect it to go viral. By the next morning, the video had 10,000 views. By that evening, it was at 100,000. Within 3 days, it had been picked up by several local news stations and had over 2 million views. The comments section was full of people sharing their own HOA horror stories and calling Patricia every name imaginable. A reporter from Arizona Central reached out to interview me. Then Fox 10 News. Then Good Morning Arizona. I did not do any of the interviews at first, wanting to keep things low-key. But when Patricia went on a local news segment to defend herself and claimed I had edited the video to make her look bad, I decided to set the record straight. The interview I gave to Arizona Central was published online and in print. I kept it factual, explained the timeline, showed the documentation, and let the video speak for itself. The reporter also interviewed other Pleasant Grove residents, and Carol Hudson was brave enough to go on record about her own experiences with Patricia. The story exploded. Suddenly, Pleasant Grove HOA was under intense scrutiny. The property management company that handled administration issued a statement distancing themselves from Patricia's actions. President Chambers resigned from the board citing health reasons, and Patricia herself went radio silent, refusing all interview requests. The Arizona Department of Real Estate opened a formal investigation into Pleasant Grove HOA practices. They sent auditors to review 5 years of board meeting minutes, financial records, and violation enforcement patterns. What they found was damning. Patricia had issued over $200,000 in fines over the past 3 years, much of it to homeowners who later paid reduced amounts to make the problems go away. She had awarded landscaping and maintenance contracts to her brother-in-law's company without competitive bidding. She had selectively enforced rules based on personal relationships, and she had used HOA funds to pay for personal legal fees in disputes with homeowners. The ADRE issued a report 4 months after my fence incident that resulted in the entire Pleasant Grove board being removed and replaced with a state-appointed interim board. Patricia was personally fined $20,000 for misuse of HOA authority and was barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. But the legal system was not done with her yet. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office reviewed the police report and the video evidence and decided to file criminal charges after all. Patricia was charged with 1 count of criminal damage to property, a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona since the damage was under $2,000. If convicted, she could face up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. Her criminal trial was set for 8 months after the fence incident. By that point, the story had taken on a life of its own. The YouTube video had over 8 million views and had been featured on several national news programs as an example of HOA overreach. Patricia Donnelly had become a cautionary tale, a meme, the face of petty tyranny in suburban America. I was contacted by 3 different documentary filmmakers who wanted to feature the story. A podcast about HOA disputes did a 2-hour episode on what happened, and I received hundreds of emails from people around the country sharing their own HOA nightmares and asking for advice. The criminal trial was held in October at the same Scottsdale courthouse where the small claims case had been heard. This time, Patricia had a much more expensive attorney, a defense lawyer from Phoenix who specialized in white-collar crimes. His strategy was to argue that Patricia genuinely believed she had the authority to remove the fence and that there was no criminal intent. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Amanda Chen, was not buying it. She called me as the primary witness and walked through the entire timeline. Then she played the video for the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said during her closing argument, "this is not a complicated case. You have seen the video. Miss Donnelly deliberately cut through Mr. Anderson's fence without permission, without notice, and without authority. She did not do it in the heat of passion. She did not do it accidentally. She got her chainsaw, put on safety glasses, and methodically destroyed her neighbor's property because she decided she did not like where his fence was located. The fact that she claimed HOA authority does not give her the right to commit vandalism. The law applies to everyone, even HOA board members. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty of criminal damage to property. Judge Morrison, who had also been assigned the criminal case, sentenced Patricia to 90 days in jail, suspended to probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay full restitution for the fence damage plus court costs. She also had to write a formal apology letter to me, which was read into the court record. Standing in that courtroom and hearing Patricia Donnelly admit that she had violated my rights and acted beyond her authority was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it proved that the system could work when you had evidence and were willing to fight. After the criminal trial, I thought things would finally settle down. Patricia moved out of Pleasant Grove 3 months later, selling her house at a loss because the publicity had made her infamous in the community. The interim HOA board reformed the governing documents to include better checks and balances on board authority. They established a clear appeals process for violations and required multiple board members to approve any enforcement action that involved property damage or liens. Carol Hudson was elected to the new board along with several other reform-minded homeowners. They voted to dismiss all outstanding violations that had been issued under Patricia's watch and refund fines that had been paid under questionable circumstances. The HOA essentially got a fresh start. My fence still stands exactly where it was originally installed, 6 feet tall and properly permitted. I still have the trail cameras up, though now it is more out of habit than necessity. The footage mostly shows rabbits and the occasional roadrunner. The civil case took a bit longer to fully resolve. Patricia appealed the small claims judgment, which was her right, but the appeal was denied. She eventually paid the $3,500 plus interest. But I also filed a separate lawsuit for the illegal fines and lien that she had tried to impose, seeking damages for emotional distress and abusive process. That case was handled by Robert Fitzgerald and took almost a year to work through the courts. We eventually settled out of court for $35,000, paid partly by Patricia's homeowner's insurance and partly out of her own pocket. The insurance company then dropped her coverage, and she ended up selling her home partly to pay legal bills and settlements from multiple homeowners who had filed similar suits once my case became public. The financial and reputational consequences for Patricia were severe. She became unemployable in any role involving community governance or property management. Her social media accounts were flooded with negative comments. She had to change her phone number multiple times due to harassment. Several advocacy groups used her case as an example when lobbying for HOA reform legislation in Arizona. I did not take pleasure in her downfall, but I did not feel bad about it either. She made choices. She decided that her authority and her desires mattered more than the law and other people's rights. The consequences were entirely of her own making. The story had some unexpected positive outcomes beyond just my personal situation. The publicity led to real legislative action in Arizona. A state representative named Jennifer Walsh introduced a bill called the Homeowner Protection Act that established clearer limits on HOA enforcement authority, required detailed photographic evidence for all violation notices, mandated transparent financial audits for HOAs with more than 50 homes, and created penalties for board members who abused their positions. The bill passed the Arizona House and Senate with bipartisan support and was signed into law by the governor. They even invited me to the signing ceremony, which was surreal. I am just a guy who wanted his fence to be left alone. And suddenly, I was being thanked by lawmakers for bringing attention to a systemic problem. I used some of the settlement money to establish a small legal fund to help other homeowners in Pleasant Grove fight unjust HOA actions. Robert Fitzgerald agreed to provide discounted services to anyone who qualified for the fund. We helped 7 different homeowners over the following year, and 5 of those cases resulted in either victories or favorable settlements. The YouTube video eventually accumulated over 12 million views before I made it private. I got tired of the attention and the constant interview requests. The news cycle had moved on, and I wanted my life to return to normal. I kept a private copy of the footage, of course. That video was the evidence that changed everything, and I would never delete it entirely. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I had not had that trail camera footage, it would have been my word against Patricia's, and she probably would have gotten away with it. Second, standing up to bullies is expensive and exhausting, but sometimes it is necessary, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who comes after you. Third, the legal system moves slowly and can be frustrating, but it does work when you have evidence and patience. The fence incident happened 3 years ago now, and Pleasant Grove is a much different community. The HOA is run by reasonable people who understand that their job is to maintain property values and community standards, not to act as petty tyrants. Violations are handled with clear communication and documentation. Fines are reasonable and tied to actual damages or costs. Board meetings are well attended because residents trust that their voices will be heard. I still live in my house on Sagaro Drive. I have replaced the trail cameras with regular security cameras that provide better coverage. I have planted a garden in my backyard, putting in tomatoes and peppers and herbs that grow well in the Arizona climate. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a mixed breed named Charlie who barks at the mailman and loves to sleep in the sun by the back fence. Life is quiet now, which is exactly what I wanted when I moved to Pleasant Grove in the first place. I work my software engineering job. I tend my garden. I take Charlie for walks in the evening when the temperature drops below 100 degrees. I have coffee with neighbors who have become genuine friends, including Carol Hudson, who turned out to be a much better HOA president than Patricia ever was. Sometimes people recognize me in public, though that has become less frequent as time passes. Someone at the grocery store asked me a few months ago if I was the fence guy from YouTube. I confirmed that I was. We chatted for a minute about HOA reform, and then I went back to shopping for vegetables. It does not feel like a big deal anymore. It is just something that happened, a chapter of my life that is closed. The most meaningful outcome, beyond the legal victories and the legislative changes, has been the connections I made with other people who were dealing with similar situations. I received thousands of emails and messages during the peak of the publicity. Many were just people venting about their own HOA problems, but some were genuine calls for help. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering advice on documentation, suggesting they consult with property lawyers, encouraging them to stand up for their rights. I heard back from dozens of people who successfully fought their HOAs and won. One guy in Texas sent me a bottle of bourbon as a thank you after he used my video as an example in his own case, and got a judge to rule in his favor. Those stories made all the stress and expense worthwhile. The fence itself cost me $2,000 originally, and another $800 to repair. The legal fees and my time added up to somewhere around $12,000, even after the settlements and reimbursements. But the principle of the thing, the idea that people should not be able to abuse authority without consequences, that was priceless. I never expected to become a minor folk hero in the world of HOA reform. I never wanted publicity or attention. I just wanted to live in my house without someone destroying my property and then trying to fine me for it. But sometimes life pushes you into a situation where you have to make a choice between fighting back or accepting injustice, and I chose to fight. Patricia Donnelly taught me something valuable, though I doubt that was her intention. She taught me that bullies rely on people being too intimidated or too exhausted to resist. They count on the fact that fighting back is expensive, time-consuming, and stressful. They assume that most people will just pay the fine, move on, and let them continue their behavior. But when you call their bluff, when you stand your ground and force them to defend their actions in a court of law with actual evidence and procedures, they usually crumble. Patricia had gotten away with her behavior for years because nobody challenged her effectively. Once someone finally did, the entire facade collapsed. The last time I saw Patricia was about 6 months after the criminal trial. I was at a Home Depot in North Scottsdale buying supplies for a patio project, and I spotted her in the gardening section. She was alone, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, clearly trying not to be recognized. We made eye contact for just a second. I saw recognition flash across her face, followed by something that might have been shame or anger or both. I nodded to her, just a simple acknowledgement that we had seen each other, and then went back to comparing prices on paving stones. She left the aisle quickly. I felt no satisfaction in that moment, no sense of victory, just a kind of sad awareness that she had destroyed her own life over something so petty and preventable. If Patricia had simply followed the HOA's own rules, if she had sent me a written notice and given me 30 days to respond, if she had brought the issue to the full board, instead of taking matters into her own hands, everything would have been different. We probably could have worked out a compromise. Maybe I would have agreed to move the fence or lower it in exchange for the HOA paying for the changes. Maybe we would have discovered that her view complaint was not actually supported by the CC and Artiques, and she would have dropped it. Instead, she grabbed a chainsaw and created a viral video that cost her job, her reputation, her money, and her home. That was her choice. Those were her consequences. As for me, I got my fence, my peace of mind, and a story that I will probably be telling my grandkids someday, if I am lucky enough to have any. I also gained a much deeper appreciation for property rights, due process, and the importance of standing up for yourself when someone tries to abuse their authority. The fence still stands 6 feet tall along my back property line, pressure-treated pine painted in approved cedar tone, exactly where it was always supposed to be. Every time I look at it, I remember what it cost to keep it there and why it was worth every penny, every hour, every frustrating moment of the legal battle. It is just a fence, but it is also a principle. It is the idea that your home is your castle, that rules apply to everyone equally, and that nobody gets to destroy what is yours just because they have a title and an inflated sense of their own authority. Patricia Donnelly cut through my fence. Trail camera footage made her famous in court and infamous everywhere else. And justice, slow and expensive as it was, eventually prevailed. That is the story. That is what happened when one HOA Karen pushed too far and discovered that not everyone will back down. These days, when new residents move into Pleasant Grove, several of them have told me that they specifically chose the neighborhood because they heard about the HOA reform. They wanted to live somewhere with reasonable governance and accountability. In a strange way, Patricia's abuse of power led to creating a better community for everyone else. I am still in touch with several of the homeowners who came forward during the investigation. We have an informal network now, people who keep an eye on HOA governance and speak up when something seems off. Carol Hudson consults with us before major decisions, which is exactly how an HOA should work. It should be a collaboration, not a dictatorship. The garden is doing well this year. The tomatoes are producing like crazy, and I have been giving away bags of them to neighbors. Charlie has become the unofficial mascot of Saguaro Drive, stopping at every house on our walks to get pets and treats. Life is good. Life is quiet. And my fence, the fence that started everything, continues to stand exactly where it belongs. Approved, permitted, and 6 feet tall, just the way it should be.